Hello, everyone. Mic check, mic check. I don't hear the mic. Can everyone hear me? Well, you can hear me without a mic, probably. Mic's working? Okay, great. Welcome, everyone, again to the Peaceful Solution Character Education Teacher Certification class. If you're tuned in on the internet over Facebook, and if you're standing here at the Peaceful Solution headquarters, you can be seated. And if you're tuned in again online on Facebook, you can go ahead and go up to the top of our page and click the where it says download the manual, and you will find a list of manuals there. And the one we're working in right now is the third manual in this intermediate series, the self-control unit. And we're going to be picking up back on page, well, tonight we'll be picking up on page 63. But of course, in every class, we always want to do a review of the prior class to kind of, refresh our mind. It's been 3 days, so we tend to lose a lot of the information. We only retain a certain amount of it. So we're going to go back a little bit here. And I just want to do a quick review. If everybody could turn to page 61. And it talks about the question of the day. It says, why do we get angry? And remember, this chapter 3, is control your anger. Now, we get angry because we experience something that is unpleasant or our expectations aren't met. And remember that a lot of people get angry for many different reasons, and those reasons are called triggers. And a trigger is something that causes something to take place. A trigger could be a person, a situation, or an experience. And we learn that some people fall into what's called, trigger or anger traps, where, a certain event or a certain person or a certain situation can they'll consistently make wrong choices, and they'll let their thoughts and emotions get away with them, and they'll choose to become angry about situations. It's kind of like getting into a rut. Like, for instance, somebody does something to annoy you, you start having negative thoughts, you choose to get angry, and then you respond in one of the 3 ways that we're going to learn about tonight, which is called your anger style. And if you don't learn the peaceful solution, you're going to keep making that same choice over and over and over again, until you learn this information and how to get out of that trap. Remember, knowledge is power. Knowledge is power to avoid the traps. Okay? There's anger traps are one of the traps that we can avoid, along with the negative influences, etc. So let's look at the first slide. If you could put the first visual up for me, please. Yoo-hoo! First visual, there you go. Okay, so if you remember on page 61, there's some common reasons people get angry, okay, in these anger traps. It's called feeling a little insecure. Don't take everything so seriously. So insecurity, it says a common anger trigger lies in taking the random comments and actions of others as if they were intended to be personal. And this stems from one's own insecurities and issues involving self-worth. And you see the girl here probably looking at a comment made on the Facebook or some social media, or possibly reading an email, and somebody made a comment, and it might not even been something, that was intended to be against her, but sometimes people, because of their insecurities that they feel inside about themselves, they're not sure about themselves, they're not sure about what they believe, they become, they get angry. It can lead to anger. Their thoughts can lead to the feeling of embarrassment or, frustration or whatever they feel. And then they can choose to become angry based on the thoughts they have. Or they can choose to have the cool thoughts and cool down. And we're going to learn about that also as we proceed in this chapter. Okay, so That's on page 61, by the way, feeling a little insecure. It says, and it gave us the example that, your friend comments on how much she dislikes watching comedies. You, however, like watching movies. An insecure person would think, that just because your friend doesn't like the same movies you like, or your taste in movies, that she doesn't like you. Well, that's taking it to the extreme. But a secure person would understand that if someone doesn't like something you like, it doesn't mean they dislike you. Everyone's different, and they have different likes and dislikes. Remember what we learned in the character unit about personality. Everyone has different likes and dislikes, and that's okay. Our personalities can be different, and that makes the world interesting. But what should we have in common? What should we all share in common? Personality or character? Or character. Our character should all be, we should all be striving to have a perfectly moral character. Okay, that's what we should be striving for. And we should all have that in common, that same common goal. And then the next anger trap, let's look at the next slide, was on page 62. And this is also called a trigger. It's called jumping to conclusions. And we learned that jumping to conclusions simply means arriving at a false belief due to a lack of accurate, truthful information. And of course, we use the example of, sometimes what you see or even what you hear might not be what it appears to be, and it might not be what you heard. Okay? Sometimes it could be kind of like you hear somebody talking over the phone, and they're saying they have kids, and they feed them grass, and they make them sleep in the barn. Right? And you're like, man, I need to call CPS. This sounds like some kind of child abuse going on here. But if you'd have took the time to ask the person, they would have told you, oh, no, I was talking about my goats. We call them kids, And yeah, they eat grass and they sleep in the barn. Right? So it could be something really just that simple, but sometimes we arrive at false conclusions or false beliefs because we don't get the accurate, truthful information. Okay, and then it says, we sometimes make assumptions, second paragraph, based on insecurities about what we see and hear. For example, you see two of your friends at the water fountain. They're talking and laughing while looking in your direction. You think they're talking about and laughing at you, so you ignore them the rest of the day, which we're going to learn about tonight, one of the anger styles. You ignore them the rest of the day, but if you had taken the time to gather the facts, you would have found out they were laughing at a funny poster that was tacked to the wall directly behind you. So remember, this is another common anger trap or a common trigger, is jumping to conclusions. And tonight, we're going to pick up on page 63, which is entitled, Work It Out, Don't Fight It Out. Okay, but before we do that, I want to go back to our LP 3D, and we're going to look at number 4, because we want to refresh our mind. We read this before, but we want to refresh our mind on the instruction, what we're trying to get across in this particular step of our procedure for this chapter. It says, instruct students to turn to page 61 and read the question of the day, which we did. Tell students that everyone has anger triggers. Although these triggers can vary from person to person, some are more common than others. Have students read and discuss the sections entitled Feeling a Little Insecure, Jump into Conclusions, which we have done, and now we're going to proceed to Work It Out, Don't Fight It Out, found on page 63. Remind students that anger never resolves conflicts, okay? Remember, the two wrongs don't make a right. I think Chris and Catan and David probably reminded you before in the past about the author Israel Hawkins heard this from his father, and I believe it's written in the foreword of one of these books, where he said, if he hadn't have heard his father say, son, two wrongs don't make a right, if that hadn't have been planted in his mind at an early age, he might have fallen into these same, traps that other people are falling into. But those few words, just that reminder, that two wrongs don't make a right, getting even is not going to solve the problem, it made a huge difference in his life. And it makes a huge difference in the lives of everyone when they're reminded of these things. and it's coupled with the teaching of the peaceful solution, which gives them and implants in them this self-control that they need to carry that out, or carry out the thoughts that will lead to the peaceful feelings and the peaceful actions. So let's go ahead and look at page 63. Work it out, don't fight it out. And by the way, let me tell you, that umpire stand, you notice he's got on a helmet, or he's got a face guard, and he's got a chest protector. It's not smart to get in between two people like that, It's kind of like two dogs are fighting, and you take them by the ears, trying to keep them from biting each other. What do you think you're going to get? They're probably going to bite you, right? So it's not very smart to get in the middle. But now, when we get in the middle, when we become mediators, when we're a peaceful solution mediator, doesn't physically mediate. They don't get in between them and, hey, break it up. What we do is we're preventive medicine. We try to educate people to behave in ways that won't start a conflict in the first place, like not to steal, not to name call, not to tease, not to bully, to show that respect to everyone. So, but if there is a problem, we don't take sides. What we do is we try to get both parties to see what the peaceful solution says and how they can resolve their difference, their conflict. Remember, a conflict is a disagreement between one or more people, and we try to show them how to resolve the conflict in a peaceful manner where nobody gets hurt or property gets damaged or the environment gets hurt in any way. So it says, another common anger trap lies in using abusive behavior as a means to resolve conflicts. Just because you have a conflict with someone does not mean you have to resort to verbal or physical abuse to get your point across. Conflicts are not excuses to become angry. Conflicts are simply disagreements between people with different opinions, different needs, and different wants. As you will learn in the next chapter, respectful communication and interaction, as well as listening to each other, can resolve any conflict a lot faster than anger ever could. Now, I want to ask you a question. I want you to go back in your memory here to when you were very young, because you're going to have to do that right now, because where did we get this idea that just because we have a conflict with somebody, that we have to resort to verbally or physically abusing someone to get our point across? Well, we learned this at early ages, at a very early age. And one of the ways it was done was through the media, whether it be cartoons on TV or whether it be comic books. I mean, even in the comic books, I think I told you about the old Charles Atlas bodybuilding ad they had in every Archie and Veronica comic book. On the back, it'd have some guy sitting on the beach with his girlfriend, and some bully came along and kicked sand in his face in front of his girlfriend, and the skinny little wimpy guy was like, oh, he's all embarrassed, because he got sand kicked in his face, and everybody on the beach saw it, and this and that. So he thought, what can I do to get back at this bully? How can I retaliate against this guy? This guy's like, 6'5" and, buff and everything else. What am I going to do? So he finds out about the Charles Atlas bodybuilding program, and it shows, he goes to the program. It shows 6 weeks later, here he comes, he's all buffed up like that guy that kicked the sand in his face. And he sees him on the beach, that same guy that bullied him. He sees him on the beach and he knocks him out. And his girlfriend's like, woo, you're my hero, right? Because he took the Charles Atlas bodybuilding course, I mean, really, guys? Really? That's the way to handle situations like that? That's going to bring peace? Because I guarantee the guy that kicked his sand in his face originally, he's probably going to come back, right? Possibly he might bring a knife. Possibly he might bring a gun. Right? Because The one guy might have won the battle, but the war goes on. And that's the way it is in society out here. I think Chris mentioned we have a video that one of our Peaceful Solution instructors made because he was bullied in school up in Wisconsin, and it's called Tit for Tat. And it shows, I think we'll show it one night, possibly Chris or Catan or David can show it, but it shows the stupidity of retaliation and what it leads to, and how it's so simple for an argument between a conflict between two people to escalate and escalate and escalate, where eventually somebody pushes a button and we have a nuclear war. Which, who wins a nuclear war? No one will win. There's going to be devastating consequences for everyone, not just the two people that are going at it. Okay, so we've got to learn how to work it out, not fight it out. So we learn these things at an early age, and I'm going to show you one of the ways we learn it. And I'm not picking on this particular cartoon, but I'm going to show you one of the cartoons I grew up with that had a huge effect on my attitude, the way I perceived how to handle situations, etc. And I didn't even realize it was taking place. Let's go to this next visual. Okay, so Tom and Jerry, as an example. This is only one example of many I could have brought, but this is from Wikipedia. This is a Wikipedia article, and I want you to listen to what the pertinent part says here. It says Jerry's the mouse, okay? Tom is the cat. Now that little mouse looks like a little pipsqueak, but listen to what Jerry was able to accomplish with this big cat in the cartoon. It says Jerry's methods of retaliation are far more violent, with frequent success, including slicing Tom in half, decapitating him, shutting his head or fingers in a window or a door, stuffing Tom's tail in a waffle iron or a mangle, kicking him into a refrigerator, getting him electrocuted, pounding him with a mace, club, or mallet, letting a tree or electric pole drive him into the ground, sticking matches into his feet and lighting them, tying him to a firework and setting it off, and so on. And this went on for 30 minutes. This went back and forth between the cat and the mouse, back and forth for 30 minutes. 30 minutes of programming. Okay? And I watched it. I think Tom and Jerry came on every day after school. And that's just one of many cartoons. How else did we have these things planted in our mind at a very early age that we have to resort to, when we have a conflict, we have to resort to verbal or physical abuse to get our point across? Okay, cartoons, the media was only one example. Let's look at the next example, the next visual. Okay, we had, from a very early age, the boys had our G.I. Joes, right? We had our G.I. Joes. I had hundreds of them, I think. I used to stand them all up and knock them all down, pretending, I was in a war, and, then I'd stand them back up again, all day long, with the G.I. Joes. And then we had I know my parents used to buy us the model airplanes, the fighter planes that we would put together with the glue. And of course, not just these kind of toys when you're young, but as you get a little bit older in your teen years, you start to use that Xbox, right? And what do they have to offer on the Xbox? We went through a lot of these things in the character unit. We talked about a lot of these influences, For the most part, what are they doing on these Xboxes? Are they playing peaceful games that teach them how to resolve conflicts in a peaceful manner? Like peace building, diplomacy games? Where they're all sitting around a table in the video and they're all discussing how they can solve this problem without anybody getting hurt. That's what they're doing? Yes or no? No. What they're doing is they're learning how to blow things up, how to decapitate people, how to shoot people. They're learning the art of war. They're learning the art of war. They're learning the way of war, okay? Because when you pick up I don't care if you pick up you're using a joystick. I don't know why they call it. That's a false thing right there, a joystick. Joy as you murder, destroy, cause mayhem and damage, right? That's a joystick. So they're putting in your mind that that's, and think about it, that same joystick, put that Xbox back up for a moment, please. Actually, that one's got a little bit of a different thing on it, but the joystick that I remember when I was growing up had an actual little stick that stuck up there and you would move it around, kind of like a stick shift on a car. Do you know that that's the same device they have on these the guys that control drones for the military? A guy could be sitting 2,000, 3,000 miles away, and he's got a drone up there looking for somebody that he wants to kill, that he wants to murder in a war, and he can actually, with that drone sitting 3,000 miles away in a little room somewhere like he's playing a video game, that drone can zero in on that person that he wants to destroy, that he wants to murder, that he wants to wipe off the face of the earth, and with the push of that button, just like he does on the video game, that person's life can be zapped out. Their car destroyed, those things are pretty accurate. But the guy it's like to him, it's like playing a video game. There's nothing to it. He just guides the drone and he pushes the button and boom, the life is zapped out. He doesn't even have to see the blood. He doesn't have to see anything. Makes it simple, I guess. Is it so simple? Have you ever seen a scene where you had, I've seen scenes of, what do you call them, suicide bombers, like in Israel. We have the conflict with Israel and Palestine. I've seen pictures of suicide bombings, real pictures. We only hear on the evening news, the major networks, they don't show what really occurs. You only hear or read about, suicide bombing kills 10 people. But they don't show you the real face of what it looks like the limbs, the arms, the head, all the body parts everywhere, all over the place. They don't show you that. They don't show you what it actually does. The shrapnel and how it comes out, and there's nails sticking in people, and whatever things that they put in those bombs that they strap on somebody, that somebody actually straps on themselves. Because somebody's convinced them that war's the answer, that how to resolve your differences is go destroy yourself and destroy your enemy over there. Just strap that bomb on. And we have young children that do this in many countries that are taught to do this. They're taught to kill their enemy at a very young age. Now, we're taught the same thing, so don't start thinking too highly of ourselves here. We're taught the same thing. We just don't actually carry it out, physically, but we're carrying it out in the video games. When we play the point and shoot games, when we use the joystick to destroy. I hate to call it a joystick. It's really not the right term. But remember, I'm talking about things that we've grown up with that have been put in our minds from a very young age that have actually solidified in our minds that war or fighting back, retaliation is the way to resolve our conflicts that we have with somebody. In fact, I remember when the Vietnam War, they actually called it the Vietnam conflict. I don't know why they called it a conflict. They confused war with conflict. A conflict is simply a disagreement between two parties. A war is an absence of self-control between two parties where they go into a rage and they just start destroying everything. So there's a difference between a conflict and a war. Okay, now let's look at the next visual because I want you to understand something that we learned in the character unit. They call these TV programs, Tom and Jerry, or any of the other TV programming that we're watching. This violent programming is being programmed into our mind and heart. It enters in through our eyes, our ears. Those are the ports. Those are the ports of entry that the influences come through. And it's downloaded into our brain. Okay? It's taken into our brain and into our heart. Okay, now, we might not even realize, what I want you to understand is, when we're watching these things, it's not like we're sitting there thinking, okay, I'm programming myself, to get even, or I'm programming myself, to have a certain attitude about, we're not even thinking about it. We're just enjoying what we're seeing. We're just thinking it's entertainment. It's harmless. We're not thinking there's anything going on. But we are being programmed. Your brain is a computer. Your brain is the most powerful. Your brain is more powerful than thousands of computers, thousands of the most powerful supercomputers that you could ever imagine. Okay, your brain can store more information, is more powerful than anything mankind can even dream of. Okay, and that information is being downloaded. It's downloading. Now, guess what? Look at the next visual. Do you remember what we learned on page 65 of the character unit? Once it's downloaded, once it's taken in at a very young age, or even as a teenager, or even as an adult, it becomes a part of the subconscious mind. I remember one of the first classes we did in the certification, Chris showed a picture of how subtle influences are. Remember, and he showed that picture of the iceberg? And how, something can look really small. The iceberg looks really, really small, but when you look underneath the water, when you go underneath, you see the iceberg is actually probably 90% bigger than you actually see on the surface. Well, the subconscious mind is the same thing. We only consciously use about 10% of our mind. The other 90%, called the subconscious mind, that's underneath, all this information is being stored away in there. Everything that we see, everything that we hear, everything we experience, everything even our mother experienced when we were in our mother's womb is in our subconscious mind. The author of The Peaceful Solution said you can take a book, and you can just flip through it. Like I'm flipping through this book right here, just like this. And I'm just glancing at the page. I don't have to read the page. I can just, if my peripheral vision hits that page, you know what I just did? I'm down, my subconscious mind is taking a picture of every page I'm looking at. Every little word on this page, every picture, every little dot of an I, and everything is being downloaded into my subconscious mind. Now, I'm not telling you a way to cheat, where you remember, you can't use it. You're not going to be able to just pull it up at will, So you can't say, yeah, I read a book in 1 minute, Well, it's not going to work. You're not going to remember it all. But your subconscious mind, it's going to remember every bit of it. Okay? And you all know as well as I do, you can close your eyes right now, and you don't even have to close your eyes. And you can think of any movie you've ever seen, or any song you've ever heard, or anything you've ever done, and you can sit there and you can live it again in your mind. You can even see, in Scarface, he's standing there in the movie Scarface, Al Pacino, he's standing there, and he's standing on the balcony, and he's like, I'm Tony Montana, and there 200 bullets are ripping through him, and he's all like standing there, because he's all high on cocaine and his body's all, he's all worked up and jacked up, and he's taking 200 bullets into his body, and he's still talking. He's still talking, these bullets are ripping through his body, but he's still talking, In Hollywood, you can do that. You can keep talking, even though there's 200 bullets, just strafing through your body. How many bullets do you think it would have really taken to take him down? Hollywood has a really strange way of impressing things in your mind, where they made you think that this is some kind of hero, man. Look at this guy. He's a hero, No, it only took one bullet to take him down. Okay. But these are the kind of impressions they put in your mind, and you don't forget them. They make it so believable and so real in your mind, these scenes they show you, of violence. Because they want you to remember, There's somebody that wants us to remember. Okay? I don't know if we ever kind of got into it but we will, I think, later on in this unit of the peaceful solution, a little later on, about how, the military, the Pentagon, and Hollywood have a I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine type of relationship. Did you know that Hollywood producers have offices in the Pentagon, the War Department in Maryland there? And did you know that they're actually able to use, the Pentagon will allow them to use military equipment in exchange for, hey, let us look at the movie script and approve of it, and make sure you make the military look really great, Make sure, you make the military look glorious. Make sure you make war look glorious. We don't want it to be a downer to people. We want them to think war is a great thing, because we want people to join up. They're looking for recruits, right? Now, go back to that gun, or that G.I. Joe, or that, the Xbox, or whatever we were playing when we were young. Somebody was trying to program us because they need fighters. Plain and simple. And if you don't believe me, you can go on the internet right now and you can look up the Hasbro toy company, just as an example. And you can find out that way back in the 40s, they were looking for, they needed people to fight, because not everyone wants to join the military. There's a built-in aversion, remember, to killing your own kind. Even little children know you don't pick up a pencil and start stabbing your friend because, he got in your lunchbox or something. They know better than that. So people have to be programmed to kill, programmed to want to destroy. And the toy companies made a deal with the military planners, and they started making cap guns and, little cap guns for children to play with. And they started selling them in the toy stores, and parents started buying them. They didn't really know what it led to. They didn't understand what it would lead to, putting a toy gun in their child's hand. They didn't understand. But they understood when their boy got older and they saw him with a real gun in his hand, and they said, "Hey, what are you doing with that gun? Put that thing down." "Well, what's wrong, Mom? Been using this thing since I was knee-high to a grasshopper." "Yeah, but that's a real one." "Yeah? Let me ask you this." And I ask parents this. This is something I ask them because I want them to really visualize. We don't think there's anything wrong with putting a toy gun in someone's hand. But what if you walked in your house and your child was sitting there with all of his friends around the dining room table, and they had a toy bong, and they were all sitting there passing it around, pretending they were getting high on cocaine, on what's that called, crack? And they had a little piece of paper, a white piece of paper, and they put it in the pipe, and they were all passing it around. "We're just playing, Mom. What's wrong? We're just playing." Do you think a parent would like to see that? Oh, no, they would not. They would be very upset, and I'm sure that they would scold their children and the children that were all doing that. But what's the difference between putting a gun in their hand, a toy gun, or a toy bong? It's all wrong. Hey, we could make a song. Bong, wrong, song. Right? We could write a song for the peaceful solution. And we got any songwriters here? Oh, great. Okay. But think about it. Think about how we don't stop and think about the end result of what we do with our children, what we put in their hand, or what we let them see, or what we let them play with. The only way you're going to understand this, the only way any of us can understand this is through education, like we're getting right now. If someone doesn't bring this to our attention, we're never going to understand. We're never going to think much of it, okay? In other words. And I remember once, I think I told you, I tell a lot of little stories, so I'm not really sure if you might not remember it. I don't even remember if I told you, so I'll tell you again. But there was a mom once that came to the Peaceful Solution, and she had a 4-year-old in preschool, and she said, my 4-year-old is biting people and hitting them and stuff in class. Do you think you can help my child? And I'm like, well, sure, And so the mom brought her in, and it didn't take me 5 minutes to figure out what was going on. And I'm not, I don't blame the mom, because the mom didn't know until somebody just simply pointed out something that was taking place. Well, what I noticed was the little child came up and pinched her or did something to her, and the mom hit her and pinched her back and said, "Don't you ever pinch me again." And I just kind of looked at the mom and I said, "Did you notice what you just did?" And she goes, "What?" And I said, "You just pinched her and you hit her and you told her not to hit you." She goes, "I did?" That second, it was like a frying pan moment to her. She's like, "You're right, I did do that." I said, "Well, that might be where she's getting it." And she agreed. That had been going on a long time in their house. So she promised that she would start working on not doing that, and teaching her daughter not to do the same. But you know what? If somebody had not have pointed out that little thing, it's just a little thing, she would have never thought about it. And that's the way education works. Remember, it enlightens the mind. It illuminates the dark areas, that we don't understand, or that we're in darkness in, and we're looking for answers. We're like kind of just groping around, looking for the light switch. We don't really know why we're in this rut. We don't understand what's making us tick. We don't understand why we get angry. We don't understand why we lash out. We don't understand. We just think it's normal that, well, that's what you need to do. I just had a student tell me earlier today, well, that's just when I get angry, or when somebody upsets me, I get angry and then I go find a bottle of booze, because that's what I do when I get angry. That's what I've always done. I just think it's normal to do that. I said, well, we got to stop thinking it's normal to do that. Now that we know it's not normal to do that, now we need to start thinking, what else can we do when we choose to get angry? What else can we do? What else could we do besides grabbing that bottle of booze? And it's really just as simple as that. It's learning the steps, learning the techniques, and learning this information that enlightens us and helps us to make better choices. So let's look now at straight talk. And can you put up the next visual so everyone can read this? It says, don't use anger as a way to shield yourself from having to deal with some of your true feelings. Many people respond with anger rather than expressing their emotions, such as feeling hurt, disappointed, or afraid. By the way, those are called what? Those are called emotions. Hurt, disappointed, afraid. Those are primary emotions. Those are primary emotions, okay? It's okay to feel those, okay? But we need to deal with them and express them in appropriate ways, okay? Anger is not a shield to hide behind. It's okay to calmly express some of your other feelings. I had a student in Zapata, Texas. And it was a couple. Actually, it was a couple. And one day, the wife called and said, "My husband's not coming to anger management class tonight. He's very upset with me." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, what's he upset about?" She said, "I got a job." And I'm like, "You got a job? I thought he said something about y'all needed more money or something. He's upset that you got a job?" She said, "Yeah." And I thought, well, that sounds kind of strange. Now, being an instructor in the Peaceful Solution, I also understand that you got to get both sides of the story. I'm only hearing one side. But when I called the husband, actually, before I called the husband, she had told me that I said, well, where did you get a job at? She said, well, I got a job at a convenience store. I said, oh, a convenience store. She goes, yeah, I'll be working from like midnight to 7 in the morning. I'm like, oh, okay. Now we're getting somewhere. Right? Now we're getting somewhere, because if I was a husband and my wife came home and said, honey, I'm going to be working the night shift at a convenience store, like one of these convenience stores where all kinds of different people come at night, right? Most people that are up at 3, I'm not saying, the truck drivers, they're out 24 hours. They're truck drivers, they're great guys, man. They move all of our stuff around. We need them truck drivers. But there's a lot of other things that come out at night. The cockroaches come out of the woodwork at night. When you go in some of these convenience stores, you'll know what I'm talking about. Don't go at 2 in the morning, okay? I'm telling you, don't go. But if you are there at 2 in the morning, you'll see what comes out. A lot of drug dealers and drug users and drunks and things come out, and they're hanging out at the convenience store. So I'm thinking, now, if I was her husband, how would I feel that my wife was going to be working from midnight to 7 in a convenience store in the middle of nowhere? How would I feel? Yell it out if you know how I would feel. Excuse me? Angry? No. What would my primary emotion be when I first heard? Yeah, I'd be afraid. I'd be afraid for who? My wife. I'd be afraid for her. I'd be afraid for her safety. I'd be afraid for her safety. And I'd be afraid that, because a lot of bad things could occur to my wife if she was working that late at night at a convenience store. So I would be afraid. But you know what? In the culture that I was teaching in the Spanish culture, men have been taught, you don't cry, you don't let them know you're real, you hide behind the anger. Put that anger shield back up, please. You see that shield? Instead of expressing my true feelings like, wow, honey, I'm really very afraid that you're going to be working at that convenience store, that late at night. That's dangerous. Those places get robbed and people come in there and there's all kinds of riffraff going on. Now, I'm very afraid for you. Oh, no. We can't do that. We got to hide behind the anger shield, right? And say, you ain't working nowhere. Right? Because that's what we've been taught to do. Rather than just expressing our true feelings, right? We got to put on the machismo, the macho man. We got to stand behind the anger shield and say, no, you ain't getting no job. You don't need no job. Right? And that's what took place. Okay? I understand that now. You understand that now. He understood that later, when he actually came to class that night, because I called him and we talked, and I understood how he felt. I would have felt the same way. I just wouldn't have reacted the same way, hopefully, because I've been taught the peaceful solution. So I would know, okay, if I feel afraid, I need to just tell her I feel afraid, not hide behind that anger shield and use anger as a shield to hide behind. Okay, and that's what this is showing us. Don't use it as a shield. Work it out. Go to the person that you're upset with, that might have embarrassed you or might have frustrated or annoyed you or whatever feeling, that you had, and work it out the right way instead of hiding behind anger, because that's not going to, all that's going to do is create a conflict, a bigger conflict like we saw with the man and the woman. And they did learn. It's a great thing that they had the peaceful solution in their life, and the woman actually didn't go to work. She didn't go to work at that place, okay? Because she saw, once her husband pointed out to her the danger of it, and once I talked to her about it, and we had a class and we all discussed it, she said, you're right. I never really thought much about that, and I never really thought that my husband would react that way, but now I understand he really did it out of care and concern. He just didn't know how to express it because he hadn't been taught about what we're learning right now. So she appreciated that. even though she didn't appreciate how he first reacted to it, right? So it's okay to calmly express some of your other feelings, guys. Okay, guys? You know, we can be human. We have feelings. We don't have to, you know, put on the macho man deal, you know. We don't have to, you know, you can cry. Grown men can cry, okay? We can express feelings. We can let them know how we feel. Keep in mind that these are just some common anger triggers. There are as many different anger triggers as there are people. It's up to you to discover your anger triggers in order to control your anger. Okay, so let's turn now back to LP 3D and look at instruction 5. It says, instruct students to turn to page 64 and read the section entitled Anger Sequence. Have students learn their anger cues and complete the self-evaluation on page 64 through 68. They will summarize the evaluation on page 69. So let's go ahead and turn to page 64. We're not going to get through all of this tonight. Catan will have to pick up next class and cover more here, but let's get started because we still have a few minutes left. And look at anger sequence. Now, you know what a sequence is. A sequence is, you know, it's an order of events that take place after something takes place. So let's look here. It says, whether we realize it or not, there's a series of steps that lead to feeling angry. These steps involve our anger triggers, thoughts, and feelings. In learning to control your anger, you must be aware of all the steps that lead to anger. What do you mean there's steps that lead to anger? It's immediate, isn't it? Your steps that lead to anger? Man, I got angry right away. It only took 2 seconds, right? Well, guess what? No, there is steps. And once you learn the steps, it's very important that you know each step so you can learn how to cut it off at step 1 or step 2, actually. You won't be able to cut off step 1 because triggers come in all shapes, forms, and sizes, right? A trigger can be an experience, a person, etc. You can't stop the test from coming, can you? Unless you go hide, even if you go hide in the Himalayan mountains, you know, you're going to get tested. Bigfoot will be up there or something. I don't know, you know. Somebody will be up there to test you, okay? I think they call it a Yeti, right? The Yeti will be up there. Maybe the Dalai Lama will be hiding up there somewhere or something. But somebody's going to be there, okay? Even your own mind. Remember, conflicts can start in our own brain, right? We can have a conflict with ourselves and start arguing with ourselves. So we can't keep the trigger from occurring. We can't stop that. But we can stop it at step 2. And that's what we're going to learn. So let's look at step 1. Anger starts with an incident that pushes our buttons and triggers our anger. Conflicts, disagreements, insecurities, and disappointments are examples of common triggers. What are your anger triggers? So you're going to ask your students to list at least 3, and they probably might not be able to list 3, but at least get 1 out of them. You know, that'd be a great first start. Ask them to think of something that triggers based on what they've learned already here that we just went over in the last few pages. Ask them a common thing that trips their trigger, so to speak. The second step is hot thoughts. What you say to yourself when faced with one of your anger triggers determines whether you become angry. Thoughts like, how would she like it if I did that to her? Or, he makes me so mad I could smack him. Those are called hot thoughts because they fuel your anger and make you feel you have the right to be angry and to act on your anger. Using any of those 3 triggers we listed in question 1, write what thoughts you would typically have when faced with one of these triggers. Now, a lot of times when I ask that question to students, they won't tell me their thoughts. They'll tell me what they do or what they say. And I'm like, no. Not what you say. Tell me what you're thinking before you say it. Make sure they understand that you're saying, no, what are your thoughts? What thoughts are going through your mind normally when something like that takes place? Make sure they're not telling you what they would say or do. Make sure they're understanding that you want to know what kind of thoughts are going through their mind, what kind of hot thoughts. And And once they understand that, they'll probably tell you a thing or two, and hopefully that'll be rated G, you know. Number 3, third step is feelings. Our thoughts produce our feelings. Therefore, hot thoughts justify our choice to feel angry. Remember, our feelings affect us both mentally and physically. Angry feelings can cause physical changes like an increase in heart rate, headaches, and stomach aches. Angry feelings also lead to irrational thoughts that intensify these physical changes. Anger creates a vicious cycle which, if left unchecked, will lead to violence. That's why it's so important to pay attention to those very first physical changes that accompany anger. The physical changes you experience when you're angry are called anger cues. You know, think about I'm sure you've watched like how they make a movie, like how they make movies. They have what's called cue cards. A cue card tells the actor, you know, it says, okay, now walk into the door, look at her and say, hi, honey, I'm home. Right? It's written on a card. It's called a cue card. And all they have to do is look at the card and follow what the card says and do what the card says. It's called a cue card. Well, a cue, in this case, is what kind of physical feelings am I, like what kind of physical changes are going on in my body right now? And I'm gonna read you some anger cues here so you can see what it's talking about. When you recognize and listen to what your body's telling you, that's your cue to start practicing self-control. In other words, it's like somebody's holding up a cue card and saying, all right, you feel this? You feel this coming on, so hey, whoa. Self-control. Remember, self-control. Remember what you learned in the Peaceful Solution. Take the following self-evaluation, check all the cues that apply to you. So here's some common anger cues. Your heart beats faster. You can actually hear it pounding. Your body temperature changes. You feel really hot or cold. You start speaking faster. You start speaking louder. You start to tremble or shake. You breathe faster. Your face gets flushed. You clench your fists. You grit your teeth. You get an upset stomach. Now, you might not experience any of those, or you might experience multiple ones. Do you have any other anger cues that are not listed there? You know, ask your students, is there something else you feel physically when you know you're beginning to become angry? You know, they need to recognize these things so they can understand the steps, so they can understand that, hey, even if I went past step 2 and I didn't practice self-control yet because I let my thoughts stayed hot, even when you get to step 3 and you start to feel, you know, these feelings, you can still cut it off. You can still recognize, hey, whoa, anger cue. It says, you know, the cue is control yourself. You can recognize that and say, okay, I need to stop, think, you know, weigh out my options. Stop first of all and just calm down, right? Let my emotion pass before I say or do anything. And that might take a while, you know, however long it takes to calm down. All right, flip the page over. So the next step, and I'm going to go ahead and put up that last visual. I want everyone to look at these anger styles as we're reading this. The next step, step 4, is behavior. Uncontrolled anger can lead to rage and even violent behavior. The typical angry person might have one of the following 3 responses: withdrawal, displacement, or attack. To withdraw means to ignore the source of the anger. People who withdraw either pretend they're not angry or they hold their anger in. They give others what is commonly known as the silent treatment, as you see on the left. Okay, you know, the person, you know, got his arms crossed and he's looking the other way and you don't want to talk to that person. Okay, he's not saying anything. That's called withdrawal. That's the anger style of withdrawal. People who withdraw stew in their anger. Eventually, people who withdraw reach their breaking point where their anger erupts, causing harm to themselves or to others. Studies show that holding on to anger actually weakens the immune system, making the body vulnerable to disease. Okay? So, I've had people actually tell me, and I want you to get this because you remember you're dealing with junior high students here. I've had grown adults actually tell me, "Oh, I control my anger fine. I control it fine when people do things. I just don't say anything." And I'm like, "Okay, you don't say anything, but what are you thinking?" "Well, I just keep my thoughts to myself. I just don't say anything." "Yeah, but are they negative thoughts?" "Yeah, but I don't say anything. Isn't that controlling it?" No. Withdrawing, if you notice on the bottom, that's called uncontrolled anger. These anger styles we're looking at, this isn't controlling your anger. Even if you keep it in and you hold it in, that's not controlling it. That's not managing your anger. That's called holding on to a grudge, right? That's like holding on and bottling up resentment. And eventually, what do you think is going to take place? It's going to erupt. Not only that, it's showing us here that we're weakening our immune system, the system that's in everyone's body that helps to keep them from getting sick and weakening their organs and even their mind. Okay? This can cause deterioration of the mind when you hold anger in like that. It can deteriorate your mind. It can degenerate it, just like it does your organs. Now, the second anger style, it says attacking. Attacking when angry results in physical and verbal abuse. Physical abuse includes hitting, kicking, slamming objects, or pushing people. Verbal abuse includes yelling, vulgar language, saying cruel things that would put down and hurt the life and well-being of the other person. Now, when I was young, I had a problem with anger, and I would come into my second grade class. My second grade teacher was so, I would come into class and just throw everyone's books on the ground off their desk because I was angry. I didn't know why I was angry. I didn't know what was wrong. And my teacher told me, "You know what, if you can stop doing that for 1 week, I'm going to take you to the circus after school's out." And I did. For a whole week, I stopped doing it, and I went to the circus with my teacher. My teacher actually, gave me that reward. But that's what I would do. I would just attack, okay? And I didn't know why. Okay, but that's not the proper way. That's called uncontrolled anger, okay? Attacking. And but the point I'm trying to make is you don't have to attack a person. You can just start throwing books off people's desks. You can punch your fist through a wall and you can say, "Well, at least I didn't hit anybody," And, I went to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist told me, when you get angry, just hit your pillow. Go in your room and hit your pillow. Don't hit anybody. Was that wise? This doctor had he had a degree in psychology. He had some kind of master's or something, right? He told me to go ahead and hit the pillow instead of hit somebody else. Is that the answer? No, because I'm still hitting. I'm still hitting something. I'm still using the attack, right? No, don't hit anything. Learn how to control. Remember, it's uncontrolled anger when we attack, verbally or physically, people or objects. Now, another type of response involves displacing your anger. This means taking out your anger or frustration on people or inanimate objects that are not directly connected to the incident that you're angry about. For example, you're upset with your friend because you felt left out. You yelled at your... Okay. For example, you're upset with your friend because he didn't invite you to his house, but instead of telling him that you felt left out, you yelled at your little brother when he tried to talk to you. Or you can do what I did when I got upset with my mom. No, don't do this. Hold on, man. No, this is what I used to do, okay? If I got upset with my mom, I would find her cat, and I would sit on the cat or something, and the cat would be like, meow, meow. And my mom would like, "Willie, get off that cat!" Because I would take my anger out on the cat, because I knew my mom loved that cat. So I knew how to get to my mom, right? Don't do that, but that's what I used to do, okay? Taking it out on animals or inanimate objects or something else, right? But instead of telling him you felt left out, you yelled at your little brother. All three of these responses are examples of anger that is uncontrolled. Uncontrolled anger leads to resentment, hate, and retaliation. Notice it doesn't lead to any peaceful resolution of a problem. So I want you to remember what we went over tonight about these anger sequence, okay, and also what we work it out, don't fight it out. Remember, retaliation is never an option for a peaceful solution character education program student, right? You've been a great class tonight. The next class will be on 4/17 at 5:30 p.m. Please join us. Katan will be the next teacher. We hope to see you all there. Remember, practice a peaceful solution. It works, right? We'll see you next time.